The stage lights were so cold I felt like my skin reflected them. The room thrummed with the polished laughs of people who thought they were making history. On the screen behind me, the Atlas Dynamics logo rotated in bands of sterile blue-white LED light, the antiseptic glow of companies that believe the future can be programmed. I smiled just enough for the photographer to click, just enough so no one could tell I was counting my breaths. I had attended hundreds of events like this, where people drank to forget the things they did not dare to say. But tonight was different. There was something quiet under the music, as if the room knew something was about to break. My hand held a glass when my phone in my pocket vibrated. A message. I kept talking with the FEA rep, laughing, nodding, as if my limbs had not frozen. Then I glanced at the screen. One cold line. Your role no longer fits the new direction. Hand over on Monday. No greeting, no signature, no period. Damon Reese. I read it 3 times, not because I did not understand, but because my brain refused to believe this was how they would end 12 years of work. The message was clinical and precise, like the job description I once wrote. Part of me wanted to laugh. At Atlas, they do not lie, they optimize the truth. I put the phone on the table, took a deep breath, and smiled exactly as if I had just received good news. The camera swept across, light skimming my face. No one noticed anything. They never do. The MC on stage announced my name, praising the woman who kept the Atlas supply chain steady through the global crisis. The auditorium applauded. I heard my own soft laugh, a sound foreign, as if coming from someone else. When they called me up to speak, I walked across the floor as if gliding over a thin sheet of water. Each step was light, measured, like I had rehearsed for the moment I would be erased from the place I helped build. I said the familiar lines, thanked partners, thanked the team, thanked the company vision. Each sentence was true and empty. When I set the mic down, a round of applause rose, and I felt it hollow as wind blown through a vacuum. I nodded slightly, lifted my glass, and let the wine touch my lips. The bitterness slid across my tongue like a farewell I never intended to speak. I saw Damon at the VIP table, 4 rows away. Light flashed off his watch glass, cold as polished steel. He was smiling at someone, hand raised as if toasting a closed deal. Maybe in his head, I had already been processed, a checkbox on some restructuring list. I did not feel anger, I felt emptiness, as if some part of me had been waiting for this. Atlas had shed its skin, and I was the old nail being clipped off. I was about to leave the stage when I caught Marian Torres from FIA in the front row. She tilted her head and looked at me with something not pity, but warning. I knew she recognized that something was wrong. I smiled, nodded, a small gesture between people who understood. It is. All right, Marian, I am still standing. I am only waiting for the right moment to sit down. The room erupted with laughter, clinking glasses, and camera flashes. Outside the glass, the San Francisco night reflected city lights like neural circuits. I caught my reflection in the window, standing straight and still, eyes no longer reflecting the lights. There is a silence heavier than an explosion, the kind that knows everything has begun to end. I opened my phone and deleted the message, not to forget, but to remember. Everything I needed to keep was already stored in my head. When I looked back at the stage, the music had shifted to a slower, softer key. I took another sip. If they chose this moment to erase me, I thought, I will choose this place to make them regret it. I raised my glass. People clinked glasses, a sweep of golden light crossing joyful faces. I still smiled. I always knew how to smile. And in that glittering night, amid the applause and praise, I felt a perfect stillness, the motionless second before the storm begins. I lifted the glass, the amber wine throwing thin streaks of light that slid across my hand like liquid memory. The hall buzzed on, but inside my head, everything had quieted. There are moments when you do not need to act, only to stand and let the world reveal itself. This was one of them. I do not know where you are listening from, maybe on the way home, in your old office, or late at night with headphones half off on the pillow. Tell me, where are you hearing this from? Perhaps I can picture you, someone silent like me, watching things collapse without shouting. If you have ever loved stories where silence becomes justice, where the overlooked make the system bow, do not forget to subscribe. What comes next will not be revenge, but calculated justice, measured in clauses, characters, and names they thought would be forgotten. And I promise, this story is only beginning. I left the hall while the music was still playing, the lights so bright that even my shadow faded across the marble floor. The city outside shimmered as if every building was celebrating something. I wasn't in a hurry. I never was. In all my years at Atlas, I learned that every rash decision was always disguised under the banner of innovation. And innovation, more often than not, was just their word for breaking what already worked. I remember my first day at Atlas 12 years ago. The glass headquarters in Seattle's tech district was still half finished, the smell of paint and new wiring still raw in the air. I'd been hired as a supply chain supervisor, a title that sounded dry, but it was the first job in my life whose purpose I truly understood. I didn't fix machines, I kept them from breaking. Simple. But it was that simplicity that kept me there while others left, unable to bear the industrial rhythm that devoured every trace of personal time. My father once worked on Atlas's first project, back when the company was just a handful of engineers dreaming of clean fuel in the stratosphere. He used to say, engineering is ethics. When what you build touches millions of lives, every wrong number is a lie. I didn't fully grasp it then, but every time I sat in a meeting room, watching directors argue about profits instead of safety, I could hear his voice in my head. Maybe that's why I never quite fit in with the polished suits, even when they called me the backbone of operations. In 2017, when the global supply chain collapsed under trade sanctions, Atlas was on the verge of losing its defense contract. I was the only one who remembered that the fuel storage system in Colorado hadn't been updated, and if we didn't adjust the logistics process within 48 hours, the entire project would implode. I stayed at the office 3 nights straight, fueled by coffee and my father's old jazz tapes. When the report was approved, the CEO called me the system keeper. I didn't need a title. I just needed to know I was still necessary. But necessary is a dangerous word. It makes people believe they're safe. I didn't realize back then that every time the company praised me, it was also quietly writing in the margins, replaceable if required. Many of the people I once worked with have disappeared over time. Cheryl from finance left after a restructuring round. Ramon, who helped me redesign the entire safety audit process, was transferred to another branch and never heard from again. I became the last of the old guard, the ones who built foundations with their hands, not spreadsheets. Sometimes, walking down the hallway in the morning, I felt like I was moving through a museum, each desk an artifact from a vanished era. Atlas evolved faster than any company I'd ever known. Departments were renamed into slogans that sounded like ad campaigns: innovation, synergy, strategy. The newcomers spoke in the language of algorithms, held meetings through colorful dashboards. I still did the same quiet work, tracking shipments, logging discrepancies, forecasting risks, the things that never made it into product launches but kept everything from exploding. Sometimes at night, I would stand by the 15th floor window and look down at the docks. The city lights reflected against the glass, creating two worlds: outside, the glittering city; inside, me, the only thing that didn't move. There were moments I thought maybe I'd become part of the building itself, a cog in its vast industrial body. And when they decided to restructure, removing me was as simple as cutting out an old part from a machine. Logical, cold, efficient. I still kept my father's old coffee mug on my desk, a small crack running through it, but I never threw it away. He used to say, "Never discard what once saved you." That mug had saved me from falling apart during countless long nights at the company, where people only spoke in KPIs and deadlines. The afternoon before my flight to San Francisco for the conference, I stood by my desk, neat, orderly, almost as if it had been prepared for someone else. Inside the drawer was an old photo. My father standing beside Atlas's first turbine, hands smeared with grease, smiling like he'd just touched the future. I placed the photo back exactly where it was and closed the drawer softly. Nothing warned me of the storm ahead. only a stillness thin as dust. Looking back now, I realize that moment was the final warning. But like so many times before, I ignored it because I believed I was still safe inside the system I once saved. And in the world of Atlas, faith is always the first thing to be cut. I remember the day Damon Reese arrived at Atlas the way you remember a bad smell that never fades. They called it a vision transfer. A Monday morning, the 12th floor conference room packed tight, everyone dressed sharper than usual, the air thick with hope and fear. Damon walked in like someone born to be photographed. A tailored black suit, a smile measured perfectly to charm without revealing a thing. He looked like the kind of man who could make people believe everything would get better, at least for the first 10 minutes. When our old director stepped off the stage, Damon took his place. No notes, no slides, just a gaze that knew it was being watched. His voice was steady, rhythmic, every word falling like it had been rehearsed in front of a mirror. Atlas stands between two eras, he said. One side is what we've achieved, the other is what we're about to become. I'm not here to preserve a legacy, but to redefine it. The room burst into applause. I clapped too. That was the protocol. But all I could think was, redefining a legacy means erasing it. And I was right. In the first few months, Damon changed everything: the logo, the slogan, even the names of departments. My operations department became the performance platform division. People started speaking in buzzwords like optimize, accelerate, and restructure, as if vocabulary could disguise the fact that no one knew who was responsible for anything anymore. Damon loved technology more than people. He believed that anything measurable was controllable. He eliminated in person meetings and moved everything to an internal platform he personally introduced, a system that analyzed every employee response to calculate engagement levels. People joked that Damon didn't need HR, just an algorithm and a few dashboards to fire an entire department. The first time I met him one on one was during a supply chain review. I'd been called in to explain why last month's logistics report was delayed by 2 days. He sat leaning slightly forward, one hand sketching squares on his notebook, eyes fixed on me. How long have you been here, Claire? 12 years, I said. 12 years, he repeated, as if measuring the lifespan of an artifact. Impressive. But maybe it's time the system got an update, don't you think? You mean me? He smiled, faint, mechanical. I'm talking about the process, but a process is only as strong as the person running it. I looked straight at him, and a system only stands when people don't rush to replace what's still working. He shrugged, pretending not to be bothered, then closed his notebook. We'll see how true that is. After that meeting, the changes began, subtle but steady. A week later, I was removed from the senior briefing list. 2 weeks after that, I stopped receiving internal reports on time. Damon's new assistant accidentally sent me an email titled Phase 1 Workforce Streamlining Strategy. My name was on the attached list, along with 3 others who'd been there since Atlas's early days. None of us was told a thing. Once, I passed Damon in the hallway, talking with the PR team. He was laughing, voice light as air. When I walked by, he paused, turned, and nodded. Not a greeting, just an acknowledgement, the kind you give to an old object that's still barely functional. I returned a polite smile. He looked at me for a beat, then said, Claire, I really admire people who've stayed loyal this long. But the world changes faster than we expect, and sometimes the hardest part isn't creating something new. It's letting go of the old. I answered slowly. I just hope when you let go, you know what you're dropping. He said nothing, then smiled again. I'll remember that. From that day, I knew the war had begun, though he called it improvement. Every week, Damon met with the board, showing bright growth charts and polished graphs. He spoke of workforce rejuvenation and flexible operational ecosystems. Outside, the press praised him. The stock rose. Inside, people like me were reduced to lines on his graphs, irregular curves he meant to flatten. I didn't hate Damon. Hate is for people you still think might change. I simply watched, took notes, and waited. I knew that people who believe they control everything eventually create their own errors. And I, Someone who spent her life finding errors only had to stand still and wait for his to appear. I kept my father's advice close. When the system trembles, don't run, listen. And Atlas was trembling, gently, but enough for me to know. Structures don't collapse when they crack. They collapse when no one listens to the sound inside. Damon didn't listen, but I did. I began to notice the fractures in the system, not the kind that show up in reports, but the tiny ones that hide beneath the glossy language of strategy meetings. It started with small things: a data file edited for no clear reason, a report missing from the shared drive, an access right suddenly revoked without explanation. In a company like Atlas, those things are never accidental. I called ET, trying to keep my voice steady. Has anyone changed my access permissions? The voice on the other end carried the flat tone of someone who lived inside systems. No. The logs show no changes, Claire. You might need to re-request access through your direct manager. My direct manager now is Damon, and I didn't need to ask to know the answer. Being slowly erased from a system feels like watching yourself fade on a screen. I still attended meetings, still submitted reports, but my emails went unanswered, proposals stalled, and my name vanished from new project lists. I wasn't fired. I was being made to disappear, bit by bit. One Thursday afternoon, while reviewing the transport chain data, I noticed something off. The export numbers for the Northern Europe branch looked impossibly perfect. No delays, no deviations, no shipping errors, something that had never once happened in Atlas's history. I checked the logs and saw a section overwritten at 2 in the morning by an account ranked 2 levels above mine. The username was masked, replaced by an internal code, DR02, Damon Reese. I saved a copy, printed it, and slipped it into my bag. Not because I planned to report it, but because I knew what it meant. When people start rewriting data, they're already preparing a new narrative. And in that story, I was no longer part of the cast. The next day, I met Marian Torres at a cafe near the office. She was the FEA representative, the defense partner I'd worked with for 4 years. We'd handled an emergency project together, and she was the kind of person who never trusted anything that looked too perfect. Haven't seen your name much in Atlas emails lately, she said casually, though her eyes said otherwise. Everything okay? I smiled, stirred my coffee. Fine. Atlas is just changing its blood. Changing its blood? I guess they want the system to look younger, lighter, and easier to program. Marion smiled, but it wasn't a happy one. You know, the recent reports we've received from Atlas smell strange, like they were written to sound good, not to be right. I looked up. Thanks for telling me. Maybe I'll take another look. She set her hand on the table and said quietly, Be careful, Claire. They're not just changing the data, they're changing the people. That night, I went back to the office after everyone had gone home. The white light bounced off the keyboard, the room silent as a lab. I opened the internal archive and followed the backup paths that no one remembered I still had access to. In an old 2013 project folder, I found what I'd feared. The original defense supply chain documents had been marked obsolete, replaced by a new version signed by Damon's operations division. And inside, there was one subtle edit only the original author would notice. The clause on key personnel had been removed. That clause had protected me for years. It required partner approval, specifically FEA's, before any changes could be made to my position. Removing it meant Damon could fire me without breaching the contract, or at least he thought so. I sat there for a long time, the blue light flickering in my eyes. Part of me wanted to print everything and throw it on his desk the next morning. But I didn't. Damon was a strategist. He wanted me to react, to get angry, so he could document it. I wouldn't give him that. Instead, I downloaded every file, encrypted them, and stored a private copy. Then I shut the laptop, stood up, and looked around the room that had held half my life. Outside, the city glowed. I wondered how many people were being erased from their own worlds without realizing it. How many believed silence was safety, when in truth it only helped someone else rewrite the story faster. The next morning, Damon sent a company-wide message. Thank you all for the incredible effort. Here's to the new era of Atlas. I read it without replying. Just thought, your new era just began by deleting the wrong name, Damon. From that moment, I knew the game wasn't between him and me anymore. It was between the truth and the numbers he tried to bend. And if he wanted a data war, I could fight one better than he ever imagined. I arrived at the Washington conference like an actor walking into a play whose ending I already knew. On the schedule, it was nothing more than a public signing ceremony between Atlas and FEA, a live broadcast event where everyone wore suits, smiled on cue, and spoke the lines someone else had written. But to me, it was the day Damon chose to end it all. I didn't know how, but I knew. A man like him would never waste the chance to do it in the brightest, most crowded room. That afternoon, I stood in my hotel room, straightening my collar, staring into the mirror. The fluorescent light washed the color from my face. I didn't try to hide my fatigue. Fatigue is a good disguise. I looked at the Atlas badge on my lapel, thought of my father, then slipped my phone into my pocket. I had prepared for every scenario, or at least I convinced myself I had. The Roosevelt Ballroom blazed under rows of crystal chandeliers. Waiters moved like shadows, pouring wine without sound. At the front, a massive screen showed the Atlas logo spinning in endless rotation, the same loop I'd watched for 12 years, now a symbol of the thing consuming me. I sat near the center, surrounded by people I'd once worked with, trusted, even called allies. When the MC introduced Damon Reese, the crowd applauded like they were greeting a savior. He stepped onto the stage, confident and polished, the lights catching his hair like a silver halo. His voice filled the speakers, measured, assured, each word landing like it had been engineered to trigger belief. Tonight isn't just a celebration of partnership, Damon said. It's a moment of transformation. Atlas is moving from the old world to a new era, an era of speed, efficiency, and adaptation. His eyes swept the room like radar saw and stopped on me, just for 1 second, no longer, no shorter, but enough for me to know he knew that I knew. Glasses clinked, cameras flashed, laughter rolled. I didn't laugh. I looked up at the screen where the words Atlas, the future in motion, glowed across the stage. A perfect slogan, empty, polished, and cruelly ironic. I was thinking about the tampered data file when my phone buzzed softly in my pocket. A message. I didn't need to open it to know who it was from. I opened it anyway, and still wasn't ready for the chill in those 6 words. Downsize staff. End your role. Monday. No greeting. No explanation. Not even punctuation, as if I didn't deserve the pause of a full stop. I read it 3 times. Around me, the room kept moving, glasses touching, laughter echoing. But my world stood still. No pain. No anger. Just silence. The same silence I'd heard once before. When my father's heart monitor held one long, unbroken beep that made time itself hold its breath. I set the phone quietly beside my glass, then lifted my eyes and met Marian Torres's gaze, the only person in the room who seemed to sense something was wrong. She frowned, tilted her head slightly. I didn't speak. I just turned my phone toward her. She read the message, then looked at me, lips pressed tight. She didn't say anything, just gave a small nod. In her eyes, I saw not pity, but alertness. Marian understood the language of power. She knew this wasn't a dismissal. It was a declaration of war. I drew a slow breath and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The event continued as if nothing had happened. Damon kept speaking, his voice brimming with passion about a seamless future between humanity and technology. The crowd cheered. I turned to Marian and whispered, just loud enough for her to hear, "He just breached the contract." She frowned. "What?" "I'm still covered under the FEA continuity clause. Any personnel changes require mutual consent." Marian closed her eyes for a moment, exhaled. "He's an idiot." "Not an idiot," I said. "Just overconfident." Her eyes sharpened. "Do you have proof?" "All of it. Both the original and the edited versions." "Keep them safe," she said. "I'll talk to our legal counsel in the morning." I nodded, then lifted my glass again, pretending to join the laughter around us. The room suddenly felt distant, like I was watching through bulletproof glass. Damon kept smiling, shaking hands, basking in the applause. He didn't know that in that very moment, every word in his message had already turned into a bullet aimed backward. When the party ended, I stepped out onto the balcony. The Washington night carried the scent of rain and metal. The city lights shimmered like the circuitry of a living machine. I took out my phone, snapped a screenshot of the message, sent a copy to my private email, then deleted the thread. Behind me, Marion came out holding an untouched glass of wine. She looked at me and asked quietly, "What are you going to do?" "Me?" I smiled faintly. "I'm going to let him shoot himself in the foot. I'll just keep the gun steady." She laughed under her breath. "I'm on your side." "I know," I said. I glanced back through the glass doors one last time. Damon was still inside, shaking hands with a senior official, his smile shining bright as ever. He didn't realize that what he'd just sent wasn't a termination notice. It was the ignition signal of a $38 million explosion. And I, the woman erased from the system, had just triggered it. I didn't sleep that night. The hotel air conditioner hummed in a steady rhythm, like a machine counting down. I sat by the desk, laptop open, its pale glow reflecting my face, eyes stripped of emotion, left only with cold focus. I opened folder after folder, backup after backup, every strand of data Damon thought he'd erased. Then I found it. Clause 14.7, Continuity Clause. The familiar line was still there, as clear as evidence in an unfinished trial. The removal or reassignment of any key personnel listed below must be confirmed in writing by both parties. Violation of this clause will result in termination of the contract and full liability for any incurred damages. My name stood first, right under the signatures of both CEOs, one of them FEAs. That version had never been altered. Damon could delete the digital file, but he couldn't erase ink on paper. I saved everything, closed the laptop, and leaned back in my chair. I didn't feel triumphant, just a strange kind of stillness, the kind that comes when you realize you're not the victim, you're the detonator. The next morning, the first message I received was from Marion. "We're confirming the clause. Don't contact Atlas today. Let them make the first move." That one sentence was the instruction of someone who understood how collapses unfold. Stay silent, observe, and wait for the system to trip over itself. 3 days later, Damon struck back. Atlas released an internal memo. Operational restructuring to optimize resources, centralize processes, and standardize personnel. Certain roles will be realigned to ensure efficiency. No name mentioned. None needed. Everyone inside knew what it meant. But that wasn't the real hit. Later that afternoon, an article appeared on Atlas Pulse, the company's internal news site. Title: When Loyalty Stops Being an Asset. It spoke about the old generation of employees blocking innovation, that certain individuals were clinging to outdated systems and slowing modernization. The last line, "Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for your company is to leave," was credited to a quote from Damon's speech. I read the entire thing, then let out a small laugh. Not out of pain, but recognition. In Damon's world, image mattered more than truth. Whoever controlled the story controlled the people, but he'd forgotten that sometimes the best story becomes evidence against the storyteller. An hour later, I received an email from PR, asking me to confirm voluntary resignation. They called it a standard record-keeping procedure. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Marion had already texted, "We're auditing the contract data. Don't sign, don't reply, just watch." That evening, Damon appeared on a business news segment talking about executive restructuring and Atlas's new vision. He spoke calmly, confidently, without hesitation. To the audience, he looked like a pioneer. To me, he looked like a man burning the bridge he was standing on. The next week, everything moved faster than I expected. An anonymous account on an industry forum posted a snippet of the original Atlas FEA contract, complete with signatures, authentication codes, and my name. No one knew who uploaded it, but everyone in the field understood what it meant: a major breach. The news spread like wildfire. By Friday morning, I got a call from an old colleague, his voice low. Claire, they're in an emergency meeting. Damon's losing it. They're claiming the clause never existed, but FEA just confirmed it does. Thank you, I said. Don't say anything else. Let them talk. By noon, the internal article was gone. The account that posted it had been locked. Damon disappeared from all press appearances. But I knew he wasn't finished. A man like Damon doesn't retreat. He climbs higher so he won't have to fall. That afternoon, my phone rang again. Unknown number, I answered. A man's voice spoke quickly. Ms. Donovan? This is Gordon, legal counsel for Atlas. I've been authorized to discuss a discrete settlement. I cut him off. If you're referring to the continuity clause, I'm afraid it's too late. FEA has already issued the breach notice. Silence on the line for a few seconds. Then he exhaled softly. Then I suppose it's already decided. I didn't decide anything, I said. I just didn't delete what he tried to hide. That night, I walked along the lake near the hotel. The air was cold, the surface of the water smooth, city lights flickering across it like glowing wires. I thought about Damon, his confident smile, the way he believed he could reset everything with a single message. I thought about the numbers he manipulated, the words he dressed up, and I realized every control freak makes the same mistake. They think silence means submission, when it's really the sound of a countdown. Marion called. They're done, she said. FEA officially issued the breach notice. Their lawyers confirmed preliminary damages, $38 million. I didn't answer right away. I just watched my reflection merge with the lights on the water. You okay? Marion asked. I'm fine, I said quietly. I just think they really should have read the contract more carefully. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled, not out of joy, because justice, sometimes, is nothing more than a sentence someone was too lazy to read. I woke up before sunrise. Blue light seeped quietly through the curtains, soft and dim, the kind that warns you the day ahead will be long. I made coffee, sat at the table, and opened my laptop. Every movement was slow, deliberate, as if everything I did now had to be recorded by memory. I was no longer at Atlas, but Atlas was still all around me, in my folders, in my habits, in my breathing. A notification blinked on the screen. An email from FEA. Subject: Notice of breach. Contractual violation. Atlas Dynamics. The phrase "notice of breach" glowed like a warning beacon on the white screen. I opened it. The first line was short, cold, and precise, the language of law. According to Clause 14.7 of the agreement between Atlas Dynamics and the Federal Energy Administration, FEA, the unilateral removal of listed key personnel constitutes a material breach. Estimated damages, $38,000 USD. My name was listed right beneath it. I read it again and again, not to confirm, but to hear the sound inside each word. It wasn't a victory announcement. It was an obituary for an empire that once believed itself untouchable. Marion called almost at the same time. They've sent it, she said. The legal machinery's moving. The press will know within 24 hours. Has he reacted yet? I asked. He's trying. Atlas just issued an internal memo saying that the clause expired in 2019. I laughed softly. Too bad they don't know the original copy has ink seals and a federal certification. We've attached that to the file, she said. No one's getting out of this. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I sat there for a while, not happy, not satisfied, just hollow. 12 years of living, working, and believing in one system, now undone by a few clicks. By noon, the headlines broke. Atlas Dynamics faces $38 million contract breach allegation. The news spread faster than I expected. Their stock dropped nearly 8% before midday. The PR department issued a statement. Atlas remains fully committed to its legal obligations and is working with partners to clarify the misunderstanding. Misunderstanding, the word powerful people use as a shield against consequences. Then my phone rang again, this time from an Atlas office number. I already knew whose voice I'd hear, but I answered anyway. Claire, Damon said. Calm, smoother than I'd imagined. We need to talk. About what? I asked, keeping my tone flat. You know what? I think neither of us wants this to go too far. I didn't push it anywhere, I said. I just stopped covering what you did. He sighed. I can fix this. I have people in FEA. We can renegotiate the clause. I just need you to confirm that the contract was updated. I'll make sure you get proper compensation. No lawsuits, no noise. I paused, then spoke slowly. Damon, I used to think you were just arrogant, but now I see you truly don't understand. Not everyone has a price for their own respect. His voice hardened. You're making a mistake. No, I said. I'm correcting yours. I hung up. For the first time in years, my hands didn't shake. My heartbeat was steady. My breath felt light as wind. That afternoon, I met Marion at a small cafe near the FEA building. She placed an envelope on the table. This is the official breach file, she said. Signed, sealed. From here, it's a court matter. You don't need to do anything more. I nodded, opened it, and saw the red seal stand out against the white paper. The bold heading read, Contractual breach, continuity violation. You know, Marion said, when I first met you, I thought you were just someone too devoted to her job. I never imagined you'd be the reason a $38 million corporation collapsed. I smiled faintly, barely visible. I didn't make them fall. I just stood still while they dug the hole. Outside, the rain had started. Drops tapped softly against the window, stretching city lights into long, trembling lines. Marion rose, laid a hand on my shoulder. Get some rest, Claire. We'll handle the rest. I nodded, watched her leave, her figure fading into the rain. I sat alone, opened my phone, and stared at the message Damon had sent that night at the gala. Downsize staff. End your role. Monday. I held the screen for a few seconds, then moved it into a folder titled The Beginning. Because this wasn't the end. It was the start of a chain reaction Damon could never have predicted and would never be able to stop. I closed my phone and took a sip of cold coffee. Outside, thunder rolled, distant and faint, a sound that meant the real storm had finally begun. 3 days after the breach notice was sent, Atlas began to collapse, not with an explosion, but with silence. Big companies rarely fall into chaos. They dissolve, layer by layer, like concrete soaking through with water. News flooded every financial channel. Atlas Dynamics faces the loss of a major defense contract. The stock kept plummeting, and employees posted cryptic status updates on social media. No one said it outright, but everyone knew what was happening. Meanwhile, Damon vanished from the media. No interviews, no statements, just an absence. Cold, quiet, and more expensive than any apology. I received an email from someone inside Atlas. No subject, no sender name. He's trying to negotiate. The board is panicking. They might propose a settlement. Be careful. I didn't need to be careful. I just needed to be patient. Marion was right. I didn't have to do anything more. The courts, the press, and the shareholders would handle the rest. But there was one thing I didn't expect. Damon still hadn't let go. That afternoon, as I was preparing to leave the FEA office, my phone rang. An unknown number, but I recognized it immediately. Claire, Damon said, his voice rough, probably from too many sleepless nights. I'm not calling to apologize, I just want to explain. I'm listening, I said evenly. I never meant to hurt you, I just wanted to clean the system. Atlas is aging, you know that. You said it yourself once. The difference is in how you define clean, I said. You erased real people to protect fake data. He was silent. I could hear the tapping of a pen on the other end, Damon's habit when he tried to control himself. You can help me, he said finally. We can restate the contract, confirm the clause has expired. FEA will accept it if you verify. You want me to lie. I want you to stay safe, he said quietly. I don't want you dragged into this. I can make you disappear from the records, like none of this ever happened. I looked out the window at the gray sky. You already did that, Damon, I said. But the problem is, sometimes what's erased still leaves a shadow. His tone hardened. You'll regret this. You think the system will spare you? You think they want honest people? No. They want people who know how to bow. I smiled faintly. I've bowed long enough. Now it's your turn. I hung up. 2 days later, I heard the news. The board had called an emergency meeting. FEA refused any negotiation. The contract was officially terminated, and Atlas was ordered to pay full damages. The Wall Street Journal headline was blunt: Atlas Dynamics, a $38 million mistake born from mismanagement. Damon was suspended during that same meeting. An internal source said he tried to stay composed, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. He blamed legal, HR, anyone but himself. But evidence doesn't lie. The next day, I received a courier envelope, no sender listed. Inside was a handwritten note, the handwriting unmistakably his. You won. But winning one small battle doesn't mean you understand how wars work. This system will shed its skin, and it will swallow people like you again. Remember that. I finished reading, folded the note, and slipped it into a drawer. No anger, no fear. Because for the first time, he was right. The system would shed its skin, just not on my back anymore. A week later, the press confirmed Damon's dismissal. No farewell, no speech, no send-off. They said he left headquarters through the back door in the middle of the afternoon. A security guard saw him standing at the gate for a long moment, staring up at the building, then walking away. No one knew where he went. I wasn't happy or sad. Things ended exactly the way they should. I knew that inside those glass towers, there would always be more Damons. Younger, hungrier, blinder. But that no longer had anything to do with me. Marion called me that afternoon. Have you heard the news? Yes, I said. What do you think? I think we all learned something. And what's that? I looked out the window, where the Washington sunset burned orange and red, the light reflecting through the glass like molten steel. That justice doesn't need to be loud, I said softly. Sometimes it's just silence at the right moment. Marion laughed, her voice gentler. I think you're going to be fine. Got any plans yet? I smiled. I've had some offers, but first, I'll rest. I've spent my whole life keeping the system upright. Now I want to see what the world looks like when it stands on its own. That night, I walked down the street near the hotel, a coffee cup in hand. The streetlights shimmered on the wet pavement, the damp summer air carrying the hum of distant cars. I thought about everything: my father, Atlas, Damon, and myself. I realized that sometimes the point isn't to make the wrongdoers pay. It's to let them witness the moment they destroy themselves. And I had seen that moment, clearer than any financial report could show. I stopped at the curb, looked up at the darkening sky, and whispered a line. Not a prayer, just acknowledgement. Thank you for teaching me how to stand without stepping on anyone. Then I walked on. Ahead, the wind carried the scent of rain and metal, the familiar taste of a city in transition. I knew every storm passes, but its marks, if deep enough, never truly fade. I left Washington on a September morning, when dew still clung to the trees lining the avenue. The city looked peaceful, as if it had never witnessed the $38 million legal storm that had just passed. I pulled my small suitcase and boarded the earliest train to Maine, the place where my father once told me, calm water doesn't mean weak water, Claire. It's just waiting to reflect something greater. On the train, I sat by the window, holding a paper cup of coffee. The scenery rolled backward: buildings, bridges, billboards of Atlas that hadn't yet been taken down. Every time I saw that logo, I thought of the years I once believed in it. Believed that a person could belong to a system without losing themselves. Maybe that was naive, but if I could choose again, I'd still do it all. Only this time, I'd know when to stop. My phone buzzed softly. It was Marion. You okay? Her voice was warm, steady, the same as always. I'm fine, I said. How's Atlas? Restructuring. Rumor says they might be bought out. Damon's off the radar. No one knows where he is. Maybe he needs time to learn his own lesson. And you? What's next? I looked out the window. The fog was thinning, sunlight breaking faintly over the rolling hills. I'm taking a consulting job for a small company in Portland, I said. No government contracts, no suffocating departments, no people who think they have the right to decide someone else's fate. Marion laughed. Sounds like a clean start. Not a start, I said. Just another page. But this time, I'll be the one holding the pen. I hung up and leaned back in my seat. The train wheels hummed against the tracks, a steady rhythm like an old song. In my mind, I saw Damon again at the gala. The shining suit, the confident smile, the moment he sent that message like signing a verdict he hadn't read. I didn't resent him anymore. In truth, without Damon, I might never have discovered the quiet strength I had. Not power, but control. A few weeks later, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a dark wooden frame. It held a photograph of the old contract clause between Atlas and FEA, the section with my name underlined in gold ink. Continuity of service. Claire Donovan. In the corner was a small note written in handwriting I recognized instantly. People often forget that continuity doesn't exist in systems, but in people. RK. I smiled. RK was Robert Kessler, the chairman of FEA, the man who had silently watched Damon speak that night. I didn't know why he sent it, but I understood what it meant. Sometimes one person just has to do the right thing, and the world will move around that rightness. In October, I started my new job in Portland, a small office with only 8 people. My desk sat by the window with a distant view of the sea. Every morning I made coffee, turned on my computer, checked procedures, the same habits as before. Only this time, I did it because I wanted to, not because I was afraid of being erased. One afternoon, a young employee walked up to me. "Ms. Claire, I heard about you. Is it true you made Atlas lose $38 million?" I smiled. "No, they did that themselves. I just stayed quiet long enough for them to hear the collapse." He chuckled, scratching his head. "If it were me, I'd have yelled, sued, or caused a scene." "That's what they expect," I said. "When they think you'll react, you've already lost control. Sometimes revenge doesn't need noise. It just needs patience." That evening, I stayed late, finishing a few reports. The sky darkened, sea wind drifting through the window. I looked at the photo on my desk, the old contract, the wooden frame still smelling of fresh varnish. The gold ink had faded slightly, but my name was still clear. I remembered the last thing I said to Damon during our final call. "You think you control everything, but the one thing you'll never have is trust." Now I understand something more. Trust, once broken, can bring down an empire faster than any lawsuit ever could. I turned off the light and stepped outside. The small city glowed under the streetlights, the sound of waves mixing with a distant ship's horn. I took a deep breath, the air filled with salt and pine, and I realized maybe this was what I'd been searching for all along. Peace, without victory. I opened my phone and typed a note, not for anyone else, just for myself. They fired me by text in a crowded room, but I made them pay, not with anger, but with truth. Then I locked the phone, slipped it into my pocket, and walked through the cold night. No applause, no chandeliers, no eyes watching, only the steady sound of my shoes on the damp pavement. And in that moment, I knew the story had closed, not with triumph, but with freedom. Because in the end, justice doesn't need to shout. It only needs someone strong enough not to bow to silence. And this time, that someone was me.